2 years into the life of the Atari Video Computer System, later rebranded as the Atari 2600, Atari had released just 20 games for the system. It was becoming evident that this little upstart gadget that connected to your TV was going to have some staying power. So during the course of 1979, Atari produced a further 11 titles onto store shelves. But how would they stack up to the existing library? Well, in this video, I'll be ranking every VCS game Atari released in 1979. That's right after this. This video supported in part by...
Playing VR, I tend to sweat. It gives me an edge. So King of Nerds happens to give me an edge too. Let King of Nerds give you the edge. Bye, King of Nerds.
Hey there, welcome back to GenXGrownUp. I'm John and I am a GenXGrownUp. Thank you for taking the time to click on this video. After a successful launch in 1977 and a strong sales of cartridges in 1978, Atari doubled production of the VCS to 800,000 units. Now, like in the years before, Atari continued to get inspiration from board games and sports, creating even more video versions of well-known existing real-world games. But this year, they also dipped their toe for the first time into the practice of adapting an existing non-game IP into an entirely new video game experience, laying the groundwork for a trend that was on the horizon. Now, if you've seen any of my previous ranking tier videos, you know that I try to not judge these now decades-old games with a 21st century eye, but rather through the eyes of little Johnny. In 1979, little Johnny was 10 years old and just entering his prime Atari playing years. If only he knew what was still to come. Okay, so going in alphabetical order, let's get this thing kicked off with Backgammon. Backgammon, unsurprisingly, is the ancient strategic board game Backgammon on your Atari. As an early game for the system, you might not expect much in the graphics department, but it really kind of over-delivers. The inner and outer tables and bars on both sides are clear, and the points are even pointy, something that would have been easy to not do and even get away with on the system in 1979. To move your pieces around the board, Craig Nelson wisely went with the paddle controller option so you can quickly spin the cursor to select a piece, then spin again to choose where to set it down. Now you could play with a human competitor or against the computer, and game options even allow for variations like AC-Doocy and the inclusion of the doubling cube. I'm not really that big of a backgammon player, but even little Johnny can appreciate the polish on this board game, so maybe surprisingly, it's going to get this tier kicked off with an A. Moving on then to one of those sports titles I mentioned, and it's bowling. Bowling on the Atari 2600 doesn't look great. The human bowler is a nice large character, but the game is played edge on looking at the side of the alley. The pins are just 10 little dots, the lane has no board arrow decoration of any kind to help you aim, and yet it is an absolute joy to play. It's actually a little bit difficult to quantify exactly why I enjoy Atari bowling so much, and little Johnny did as well. Now, whether you choose guided or unguided balls, it's just so easy to pick up and play a game, and the absolute joy your little bowler exhibits in his celebratory dance upon making a strike or a spare, well, that never fails to bring a smile to my face. Bowling isn't a game I ever played for any long stretches, but it was the game that I often played in between other games as a fun and familiar palate cleanser. So I am enthusiastically placing bowling in the S tier, and that's a mountain I'm willing to die on. Okay, moving on then to Canyon Bomber. Canyon Bomber's main game is probably easiest to describe as upside down breakout, except instead of bouncing a ball up at bricks, you're instead dropping bombs down into a canyon to destroy said bricks. Using your paddle controller's button, but not the paddle, your fleet of jets and choppers will fly at a predetermined speed across the canyon, and you decide when to drop bombs in an effort to rack up the highest score. In some options, you have a limited number of missiles, and in others, the bricks stay suspended in air rather than collapsing in the canyon. Highest score when the game ends, wins. An alternate game called Sea Bomber is also included, where the canyon is replaced with ships at sea, and the paddle controller's dial is finally put to use to select a range at which your bombs will detonate. Even more so than air-sea battle or combat, Canyon Bomber has the rudimentary feel of a launch title, not a Year 3 release. It's not without its early Atari charm, but only in small doses, so I'm going to give Canyon Bomber a D. Up next, we head to Vegas for Casino. Casino is, in many ways, a do-over for the So-So VCS launch title Blackjack, both games written by Bob Whitehead. Casino includes a much improved version of the Blackjack card game with all the intricacies you might want, like doubling down, splitting pairs, insurance, and variable house rules, and using the paddle controller you can even play up to 4 people at once against the house. But it doesn't end with Blackjack. As its name suggests, this simulates being in a casino and roaming from table to table with your chip stack. By using the game's select switch, not the game reset, you can move from blackjack to stud poker to poker solitaire and back, preserving your winnings from the previous game. Win a pile in stud, take that money to the blackjack table, or vice versa. We know that the house always wins in reality, but if you can max the bank to 10,000 chips, actually anything greater than 9999, then you've beat the house and the game ends. By introducing the concept of a bankroll that persists across different games, Casino helps to spark your imagination a bit more than previous gambling games, so I'm going to give it a B. Now, in the previous year, we saw baseball and basketball hit the Atari, so it only made sense that this year, football was added to the roster. Football on the Atari 2600, at least this first attempt in 1979, is only just barely football. The entire 100-yard field is represented by 16 alternating stripes of green turf, making each section 6¼ yards. And doing the math, that means each giant player appears to be over 30 foot tall. Using your joystick, both players select one of 5 defensive or defensive plays, and when the ball is automatically snapped, you each control a single player, either the QB or a lineman, in an attempt to gain yardage. You can score a 7-point TD or get a 2-point safety, but no field goals or extra point kicking. There is a game option where you can simply be the managers by selecting plays and then letting the computer run them, but with no real strategic AI, this is about as much fun as watching paint dry. Football is another early sports title that requires a second human player because there's no single player option. So to refresh my memory, I played it with a friend to decide on a ranking. It's not without its goofy early Atari charm, but with so many limitations, it doesn't do much to satisfy that digital gridiron itch, so football is going to get a D. Moving on then to Human Cannonball. Human Cannonball is exactly what it sounds like. Your goal is to fire your little stick figure from a cannon with the goal of landing him in a small water tower downrange. Using Game Select and the difficulty switches, you can play variants that allow you to modify speed, angle, distance, and the size of the water tower. Then, based on the game you chose, modify the available variables and then mash the button to send your little guy flying. In some variants, you can even make last-second adjustments to the position of the water tower, and if you've done everything right, your guy lands triumphantly. If you're wrong, he splats with a little ouch appearing over his flattened body. You can play 2-player for the best number of good landings, or single-player where you get a point for each successful landing and the computer scores 1 for each splat. What Human Cannonball lacks is any sort of progression or variation beyond repeatedly dialing in numbers with your joystick. So even by 70s standards, it's more of a mini-game than anything, so that's going to earn Human Cannonball a D. We're just about halfway through, and I want to take just a second here to remind you of our store over at GenXGrownUp.com/merch, where you can get cool nerdy designs based on video games and TV and tech and pop culture and sports and pretty much anything you're interested in, and get those designs printed on t-shirts and hats and mugs and stickers and pins and all sorts of stuff. Look, it's the kind of thing you're liable to be buying for yourself or for a loved one or somebody you like for a special occasion. If you buy it there, not only do you get that gift, but you are helping out independent content creation like you see here on GenXGrownUp. So please do keep us in mind and check it out the next time you have a chance. Okay, let's move along with the rest of this tier, picking up where we left off with miniature golf. Miniature golf is the digital version of the pint-sized putt-putt pastime. You're presented with 9 successively more challenging mini golf holes, which include not only mazes, but also often a moving obstacle that can either pong your ball in the right direction or send it crazily off course. You can place your putter anywhere on the screen, and the farther away from the ball you are when you swing, the more force you apply and the farther your ball will go. Difficulty switches toggle the friction setting, and on the A difficulty, a putt can go pinballing around the course pretty crazily, which can be pretty fun to watch and is just as likely to sink your shot as it is to sink your game. With only 9 holes and predictable physics, miniature golf can lose its appeal pretty quickly, allowing an experienced player to complete most holes in just 1 or 2 putts. but it's just fun enough to come back to once in a while, and I'm going to place it in the C tier. From the golf green to the wild blue yonder, we move on to Skydiver. In Skydiver, you leap your little guy from a speeding plane with the goal of opening your parachute and landing squarely on your predetermined pad, all while keeping an eye on the windsock to inform you about which way and how strongly the wind is blowing. Now, Skydiver is a strictly two-player game. You can practice by yourself, but like combat, the joy in Skydiver is in having a human to play against. And the game goes out of its way to pit you against your opponent in a number of ways. Firstly, the farther you fall before you open your chute, the more points. But splat without a chute and lose 4 points. In other game options, the wind is calm, and sometimes the landing pad may be smaller or even moving. Finally, best of all, option 5 is called Chicken. There's only one landing pad, and only the first player to land on it each round scores. How long can you free fall before opening the chute? Just a second longer than your opponent? Or maybe a bit too long and the ground rushes up to meet you while player 2 glides calmly to the pad? Skydiver looks as simple as can be, but as we've noted before, graphics don't make the gameplay make the game. And Skydiver's infectious Let's Play One More Time gameplay is going to earn it a B on my tier. Up next is Slot Machine. Slot Machine is a computerized version of the traditional one-armed bandit. Well, I should say it's a computer version of the old mechanical slots, since modern slots are now all computerized. Anyhow, Slot Machine is just as mindless a game as its real-world inspiration. Play alone or with a friend, select a machine type, it may be a jackpot or payoff machine, and the number of pay lines may vary. Then place a bet with your joystick button, and pull the lever by pulling back on the stick, and watch the little icon spin round and round. Maybe you'll win something, maybe you won't. Rinse and repeat until you're out of money. Also, just like in the real world. And finally, play again if you like. Now, maybe I'm being a bit rough on Slot Machine here, since it does a faithful job of recreating a real slot. It's just that with no chance of actually winning anything, there's no real sense of fun or anticipation to be had. With so many other more interesting interactive games of chance available, Slot Machine just isn't worth your time. And I'm going to give it an F to drive that point home. Up next is Superman. Superman on the Atari 2600 is among my favorite games for the system, so you'll likely be able to predict where this is going. After the success of the 1978 film starring Christopher Reeve, Atari took notice and asked Warren Robinett to develop a video game about the Man of Steel. He wasn't interested, but did provide John Dunn with some base code for a game he'd been working on, which would later become Adventure, and Dunn took a swing. That swing was a home run. In Superman, you live a day in the life of the DC superhero. As Clark Kent, you witness Lex Luthor and his henchmen exploding a bridge, so you rush back to your phone booth and into your tights. Then it's up, up, and away as you fly around Metropolis, recovering the pieces of the bridge and delivering Lex and his goons to the city jail. Along the way, use your X-ray vision to peek at adjacent screens and avoid kryptonite that can halt your progress. Fortunately, if you do get hit by kryptonite, you can search for Lois Lane. A kiss from her will restore your superpowers so you can complete the task. Once the bridge is rebuilt and the bad guys are caught, turn back into Clark and head to work at the Daily Planet. Ding, ding, ding. Game over. Superman was a first of its kind for video gaming and for little Johnny. No longer was I just shooting aliens or eating dots, but I was an identifiable character with a life, living in a city with a story unfolding before me and an adventure to live. Look, if you love Warren Robinett's Adventure but haven't spent any time with Superman, you owe it to yourself to fix that. Especially for its time, Superman stands head and shoulders above other video games and was a glimpse into the immersive, open-world adventures that would be following in later years. Oh, and in case you're not sure how it's going to score, let me go ahead and make it official. Like the S on his chest, Superman is getting an S on my ranking tier. Okay, just one more, let's move along to video chess. Video chess needs very little introduction. It's an electronic version of the ancient Game of Kings. As long as you follow the rules of the game, it's hard to screw up a chess game, and Larry Wagner and Bob Whitehead did a fine job on the VCS here. Despite the console's limitations, the pieces are easily recognizable, and even allows corner case moves like castling and en passant capturing. You can choose to play white or black, and even set up the pieces on the board in any configuration to practice strategy in specific scenarios. Since thinking about a chess move requires a lot of processor time, video chess flashes the screen with a rainbow of colors while it's thinking about its next move. The 8 difficulty levels adjust how much time the computer is allowed to think before playing. On the lower levels, this is just a few seconds up to a couple of minutes. But on the hardest difficulty, the average listed time in the manual the computer will spend planning its move can be around 10 hours. Hours, yeah. That being said, the standard difficulties are more than enough challenge for all but the most seasoned chess players, and video chess was a great addition to the growing Atari catalog, and one that I'm going to give an A on my tier. That's all 11 games Atari released for its VCS in 1979. Only a couple that I would consider classics still today, and several that would later be eclipsed by newer and more polished versions by Atari and other publishers. On the strength of the library so far, by the time the 1979 holiday season rolled around, the Atari VCS was the best-selling Christmas gift, selling over 1 million more units into players' homes. Oh, one last notable event for 1979, by the end of that same year, 4 of their top developers would leave the company over unfair recognition and compensation to form Activision. Together, they were responsible for half of the 2,600 games Atari had published so far. So how would the system fare in the next year? Well, that's something I'll explore in my next tier video. For now, though, I will place links to some past and eventually future videos here and here. I certainly hope you found something to enjoy in this video, and I cannot wait to talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.